This presentation is delivered by the Stanford Center for Professional Development.
Yes, I'm going to have the opportunity to introduce Peter, then he's going to introduce Jess. My name is Tom Byers, and I'm one of the instructors for the Entrepreneurial Thought Leader Seminar Series, and this is my first Wednesday afternoon with you, and I enjoy doing this with my colleague Tina Seelig and Tom Kosnick and the whole crew. Welcome to the Draper Fisher Jervison Entrepreneurial Thought Leader Seminar Series, brought to you by the Stanford Technology Ventures Program and BASIS, the Business Association of Stanford Entrepreneurial Students. This talk is archived in the future by SCPD, as well as online at simply ecorner.stanford.edu, ecorner.stanford.edu. The entire series is generously underwritten by the venture capital firm DFJ. So I get to introduce Peter Fenton, who's the one on the left. Peter was a student here in the 1990s and as an undergraduate, as a philosophy major, which really makes me happy to report. A humanities major. He goes on to get an MBA here at Stanford and then enters the venture capital industry. First 7 years of being in that industry was at a firm called Accel Partners, where you may have heard of from Facebook and folks like that. But then about 7 years ago, he became a partner at Benchmark Capital and has been involved in a tremendous number of hits and successes there, including Yelp and OpenTable and others. And something I know you've heard about, Twitter. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Peter. Peter?
Thank you. So Tom threw me a curveball and said a couple weeks ago, hey, we've got a change of plans. Can you fill in for the gentleman from O-Power that couldn't make it today? And I thought the last thing you guys would want to hear from is another venture capitalist. And so I tried to put myself into your shoes and say, who would I want to have come talk? And about a millisecond later, Jess Lee popped into my mind. Jess had just won the Fortune 40 one of the 40 under 40. I can't remember what number she was, but something in the 30s, maybe the 20s. And there were really two reasons. The first is that Jess, like myself, sat in your seat. In her case, it was 8 years ago in 2004.
Took this class.
She took this class. I crashed this class a couple times. But Jess is what we affectionately call in our industry a rising star. And we spend a lot of time idolizing the people who have arrived, and I think not enough time studying people in their ascendancy to greatness. And there's so many things you can learn from a first-time CEO and how they go about it. What's cool about Jess is that it's immediately accessible. So she faced the same questions, the same challenges, angsts, and anxieties that you may face right now in your career going into it. And so I thought, what a perfect opportunity to talk to one of the rising stars. Someone will be writing books about, I think, maybe in 2 or 3 decades, and they'll attribute back to some of the ideas back to what you might hear today. But first, let me spend a second on a company Jess is part of, Polyvore. Benchmark invested in Polyvore in 2008, about the same time Jess joined the company. And it's a very simple thesis, which is Polyvore is doing to the fashion magazine industry what Wikipedia has done to the Encyclopedia Britannica. It is truly the creative destruction of an existing industry with a modern, empowered consumer model, which I think is going to change every category of media that we know. It's happened at Wikipedia, at Yelp, at TripAdvisor, at IMDb, and Polyvore is doing it in the fashion market. So what does that mean? Well, there's a value chain in any industry, and in the media industry, the value chain was content, editorial, distribution, advertising. And along came the internet, and we gave people a voice. And instead of content being this, creative types that wear turtlenecks that you have to pay a lot of money to, it was the community. And empowering the community and giving them a voice, instead of a value chain, it created a set of concentric circles, where at the center of it, there was a human being creating beautiful content. That community curated the content, and they curate that at Polyvore, at Yelp, at Wikipedia, and that draws in the readership. So instead of having to print magazines and push them out on shelves, people naturally come to your site, either through Google or they download your application. And then monetization, the really powerful thing is that the advertising is actually endemic to the experience. So the ad is the content. So Polyvore is an example of one of the companies that I think we'll look back on. And you look at Vogue, InStyle, Lucky, Cosmopolitan, all collapsed into one company. So the numbers are compelling. The company has double-digit millions of revenue. It's got triple-digit growth. It's cash flow positive. And so it's one of these rising success stories. Probably doesn't get as much press as Pinterest. I think the companies are different, but the structural advantages of the business lead us to think about a multi-billion-dollar company. And the story of Jess becoming the CEO, we'll spend a little bit of time on, but it's one of those magical stories in my career where there was an act of selflessness from Pasha, the then CEO and now CTO of the company, co-founder with Jess. Really selflessness combined with a deep ambition about the company's long-term opportunity. And Pasha called me, in about this time last year, in 2010, and said, or 2011, and said, hey, I've got a kind of an idea you may or may not like, kind of a crazy idea. What if we make Jess the CEO? And as a director, you're like, oh, what's going on? You know, you're disoriented. You're trying to figure out, okay, how do I help Pasha? What's he had a bad day? And I thought about it, and it was like thinking about Jess for today. It was immediately obvious. And within moments, the board unanimously, once they found out, had the same reaction I did. Within moments, it was clear that Jess was the natural CEO of the company. And a lot of what we do in the venture business is identifying the potentials of a CEO, because we typically back first-time CEOs, people who haven't done it before. And I would assert there's three traits that really define, in my experience, the successful first-time CEO. And they're visible in Jess, and hopefully we'll hear about some of them today. The first, which we'd seen in our experience working with her, is that Jess is a learn-it-all and not a know-it-all. And it's challenging when you get into a CEO role. It's a job no one's, if it's a first-time CEO, you've never done it before. And if you're a know-it-all, you can immediately think you have to have the answer for everything. And you can't ask for input and advice. You quickly get into water way over your head, and you're likely to drown. And Jess had proven to us that she knew how to raise her hand and ask questions, but she was a sponge for information. I saw the same thing, by the way, at Excel when we spent time with Mark Zuckerberg at the beginning. Voracious appetite to learn. The second trait, which I think is quite rare in human beings, is a clear aptitude at building the system that builds the system. And oftentimes, if you're a VP in a company, you focus on your narrow area and you just say, okay, I'm going to do my job. I'm a player on the field. I'm going to crush it. Very rarely do you get someone who says, how does my job relate to all the other jobs in the company? And what's the operating system of the business? And Jess had shown to us that she had a way to think about that at a more broad level. Because as a CEO, you no longer are evaluated, are you a good VP of X, Y, or Z? You're evaluated on the underlying system that you've built. Jack Dorsey likes to say, you know, his focus is on building the product that is the company, not the product that is the thing that gets shipped every day. Of course, that's a byproduct of it, but and Jess had demonstrated an aptitude through her ability to identify parts of the company that weren't working well, identifying friction points, trying to remove those friction points, and so a clear trait of a successful first-time CEO. The third thing, which to me is the romantic thing, the visionary thing, the thing I'm most drawn to, is clarity of purpose. And Jess said to me, when we were having some conversations of, you know, does she want to do this or not? And when she talked about Polyvore, she started with the people in the community whose lives were changed by it. And it was never about Jess. It was about, this is a service that is taking people in Des Moines, taking people in Rio de Janeiro, turning them into the vanguard in the fashion industry. They could never do this without Polyvore. And the purpose and mission of the company of empowering people to transform the way they discover fashion, the way they buy fashion, boy, that was magnetic. And you know, you've heard about this from other people who've come here. It's like you have to tell a story at a company. You need an epic story that draws people in. This is the way Jack talks about it. The CEO is the editor-in-chief. And if they don't have a clarity of purpose and ability to motivate and inspire what's possible, what happens if we get it right? And Jess had done that. There's a great, if you guys ever get a chance, Google her for a New Yorker article. Jess had there was a Polyvore article in New Yorker, because when we invest in the company, we say, hey, one day someone's going to write a story about this company that talks about some people whose lives you've transformed. Because today, to get ahead at Vogue, you got to go play politics on Madison Avenue, backstab maybe, but let's just say, you know, climb your way to the top. and we're someone sitting in a room, in the Midwest that has a fantastic fashion sensibility is just shut out of the dialogue. Your company's changed that, and people are going to want to write about that. And so Jess, in that story, she wasn't the CEO at the time. The story was really about Jess, even though it was about Polyvore. So those three traits, I think, you can go to all the different skills of a CEO. Some are execution-oriented, some are, great relationship people, some are great visionaries. Jess was the full package from our standpoint as the first-time CEO. The brief background, then we'll jump into some questions. She was born in Hong Kong, came to Stanford in 2000, and went to Larkin, they went from Larkin and had their freshman dorm. And so, again, took this class, graduated from computer science in 2004, then faced the big choice of what next, went to Google, was a sensational product manager. And I'd first heard about Jess from Brett Taylor, who was recently the CTO at Facebook. And Brett said when he started his company, FriendFeed, there's one person we have to hire out of Google, and it's Jess Lee. So that's great, but she just contacted another investment we made and asked for a job, which was Polyvore. So it was one of these serendipitous moments. But Brett maybe still hasn't forgiven me. As I say, she's been identified by a number of people in our world as, at 30 years old, one of the truly great rising star CEOs. And so it'll be a really fun set of questions today. As you guys think about your own careers and the questions that Jess faced and how she answered them, I think there's a high relevance. So with that, welcome, Jess. And so let me ask you, start with the question of, when you were in this seat in 2004, did you imagine you would be up here at some point?
No. So my background, so like Peter mentioned, I grew up in Hong Kong, and I actually, in my senior year of high school, I told my parents, like, hey, I want to go to art school. I'm going to draw comic books for a living. And my parents said, no way. They're Asian, so that was not a acceptable life choice. So I ended up coming to Stanford, and I ended up majoring in computer science because I discovered I really liked to build things that people could use. My favorite class here was CS248, the graphics video game class. And then I ended up at Google. I sort of became a product manager. I was doing, basically using my engineering degree as a product manager. But then one day someone showed me Polyvore, and it was just sort of like love at first sight. So I didn't come up with the original idea for Polyvore. All the credit goes to my three co-founders, Pasha, Guangwei, and Jianing. Pasha in particular came up with the idea. He started to build it. They launched something, and then someone showed me the site. And I was just completely in love. I was playing with it 2 or 3 hours a night, just hopelessly addicted. And then, I sent an email to Pasha. I didn't know him at the time. And I just said, hey, this site is incredible. I have a lot of ideas, some suggestions. I wasn't actually asking for a job, but it's just sort of a user like writing in, complaining about stuff. So I wrote my list of complaints.
He thought that was the way of begging for a job.
And then he wrote back and said, hey, why don't we get coffee? And so we met for coffee, and then we all clicked. And then I sort of ended up leaving Google. And I never imagined that I would be here. Yeah. Never. I went into it thinking, okay, I've always wanted to do a startup. My mom happens to be an entrepreneur. She runs a small interpretation translation business in Hong Kong, so a very small business. But I always knew I wanted to do my own thing. And I thought, hey, Polyvore is just a way for me to learn about startups. I learned a lot at Google, but the rate of learning sort of went down as I got more and more used to what I was doing there, and the company got bigger. So I thought, okay, this will be a way that I will learn everything I need about a startup, and then I'll go do my own thing. And then it became my own thing. So I wasn't there from the very beginning of Polyvore, but the other three founders, they sort of made me an honorary co-founder after a couple of years, because we did everything together from the very beginning. When we were working out of Pasha's living room, and finally we had to find an office, like finding an office space, like the toilet breaks and water's overflowing, like every little thing you have to deal with in the early days of a startup. We just had to do that together.
So going back to the decision to go to Google, I suppose a lot of people wonder, do you go to a startup or do you go to a established company? And I know Google is not yet public or about to go public?
It wasn't public at the time.
Okay, so it was
slightly before.
Slightly before, but probably you knew it was going to be a good company. Tell us about that decision and whether or not, in hindsight, you think it was the right move. And I guess along those lines, mentors you found at Google and how they impacted your career.
Sure. So I actually, when I graduated, or right before I graduated here, with a degree in computer science, I thought, hey, I'm going to be an engineer. That's what computer science majors do, and I didn't even know what a product manager was at that time. So I got an offer from Intuit, and I was going to go be an engineer there. And then I got a call from a Google recruiter saying, hey, we have this thing called the Associate Product Manager program, which I highly recommend if anyone's thinking about that path. And it was
you
sort
mean
of
the Polyvore Associate Product Manager.
but it was a program to train product managers straight out of school. And it was created by Marissa Mayer, who's now the CEO of Yahoo. And so I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. I mean, I don't know what PMs are. So I went to the interview not really knowing what to expect. And I remember I actually was so green at the time that when I spoke to Marissa, I was like, hey, I don't know if I really want this job. Like, this is very, I never imagined that I would do this. And she explained to me that all the best decisions she had ever made in life, when she had to choose between two things, she always chose the path that was more challenging. And so I thought about that, and I decided, hey, you know what? I've always planned to be an engineer, but this PM thing sounds really hard. I have to lead teams of engineers who are much older than me, who know their stuff, and I don't. I'm fresh out of school. So I decided to try it based on her advice. And she did become a mentor and we've kept in touch all these years. And she was a big, big influence on my entire career path through Google. Yeah. I look back on that and I think, well, I could have started maybe at a startup out of school, but the great thing that being at Google provided was, there's a few things. One, I got to meet a lot of really, really smart people, some of whom have gone on to do amazing things in Silicon Valley, and some of whom I've gotten to join Polyvore because we work together. So you sort of build your network at a larger company. Mm-hmm. The other thing is just the experience of being at a larger company and seeing all the benefits, which are having infrastructure. There's an IT guy to help you when everything is, your computer, everything is broken, the network's down. The great perks of the culture, the food, all that stuff, I got to experience that. And Google does have a really, really great culture. It's very engineering driven. But then I also got to experience the downsides of a big company, like red tape, bureaucracy, having to work the system to get launches approved. So I got to see both sides. And then I was able to take that experience and apply it at Polyvore when we were creating our own culture and our own sort of infrastructure. It made me really able to appreciate how nice it is to be on a really small team where you just get stuff done really quickly. There's no communication overhead. You know everybody. You know everyone's significant others. Like all the great things about startups that are small. I was able to appreciate that so much more because I'd been at a larger company.
And part of my one of Benchmark's founding partners, Andy Ratcliffe, has a great post on this, which is that people going to a successful company like a Google, call it midlife, about to go public or just went public, tend to get more credit than they deserve for the success of the company. And those that go to a startup company where it fails, they tend to get more blame than they deserve. Mm-hmm. So put another way, I think the move, if you think of it in developing a career of going to a success story, there are actually far fewer ways to succeed in my experience than there are to fail. Mm-hmm. And I'm not clear what you learn from failure. There are certain personal lessons you get out of it, but success is its own unique breed of an education. And going to a successful company, and today you could say it'd be like Dropbox or a Twitter or one could argue is Facebook past that point, I don't know, but I think it's a pretty good proxy for getting experience of hyperscale, successful culture, and you internalize that in theory. The flip side is staying there too long. And oftentimes you stay somewhere too long, you can start to get the groundwater gets into your being, where you start to assume everything is sort of like Google. And so I want to talk a little bit about that transition, because it's a pretty abrupt shift to go from the high-flying Google to the backed-up toilet Polyvore.
Yeah.
And did you just the decision itself? Did you fret over it? And I know you didn't come over overnight, because you seemed to wait about 6 months. And so, how did you think about that transition? And maybe what did it feel like for the first phase, being in a raw startup?
Yeah. So the two things that I was thinking about were, I want to go to work on something that I'm passionate about, and I was already so addicted to Polyvore. I was using it like literally 2 or 3 hours a night. I was a member of the community making lots of sets or collages. So that was one thing that checked that box. The other thing was I wanted to go, besides like always picking the more challenging path, the other thing that I find useful is to think about maximizing your learning. And I knew that I'd learned a lot. I learned so much in my first year at Google. Like I had never led any teams. Like I had poor communication skills, like all sorts of things I learned in my first year at Google. But then the rate of learning sort of tapered off. And so I decided, okay, I need to go somewhere where I'm going to learn so much all at once. And Polyvore, by virtue of being so small and only having engineers, I knew there was going to be a ton of things to learn. Like we needed to do a lot of things. We needed to find an office space. We needed to create a revenue model. And I just knew that there would be space and freedom and opportunity for me to do some of those things there. So that's why I ended up choosing Polyvore. It wasn't an easy decision. I remember when I went to sign the offer on that day, I was like, what am I doing? Wait, have I made a decision? And then I signed it and I walked out and I was like, oh no, what did I just do? So it wasn't, crystal clear, but it was like one of the best decisions I've ever made for sure.
Did you ever, in that first phase of acclimating, think you made a big mistake?
No, I actually have never thought that about Polyvore. There's always been enough positive momentum. I mean, it hasn't all been, you read about a lot of companies in TechCrunch and you think, wow, it's all up and to the right and it's so easy. It's not easy. Like even when things are going well, there's like still lots of moments of unhappiness. I actually just wrote a blog post about this, why startup founders are always so unhappy, if you want to check it out. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely hard. And in the beginning, it was hard and we had no traction and we were small. But at the same time, it was so fun to just continually learn things. I was so excited to learn about Mountain View real estate prices versus Palo Alto. And that just made it sort of, that sustained me. And then I realized after some time, maybe I should have hired a professional to do some of these things and focused on the things that mattered more. But, I've immensely enjoyed all of Polyvore.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about the transition to CEO. And one of the, just to call out, and Jess has mentioned that she's a honorary founder. Jess is a founder of Polyvore, there's no question. I think one of the things that we Jack Dorsey's spoken of this, we tend to use the term as though it has some sort of magical power. Like, well, if you're a founder, then everything's different. But we're all human beings and we all are founders in our own way of things, initiatives, things you take on. And I think it gets overly sensationalized. And Jess was from the beginning the soul of the product. And I think it was very clear to us, as we talk about her becoming a co-founder, we're like, well, of course she's a co-founder. The company actually aggressively pushed equity onto Jess to reflect that, which I thought was this is after the fact, really illustrative of the culture the company has. But the transition to CEO is a big one. And the statistics are most people don't make it successfully. I don't want to jinx it, so knock on wood, but you really, in a way that I haven't seen in my venture career, taken to the role. Could you tell us about how it's different? And a little bit about where did you want the role? And now that you're in it, how does it change your world?
Well, so one of my co-founders and I, Pasha, we have always done a lot of the leadership together, and we've sort of found our natural niches for what we were good at. Peter gives me too much credit. I think I am one of the users of the site. I like to shop, I like fashion, so I think about the product that way. But what Pasha's brilliant at is architecting systems and thinking about the feedback loops and just sort of the way the product works from a systems design perspective. So I think the combination of those two things is really the soul of what made Polyvore's product take off. In terms of the transition, the way we'd always split responsibilities was, he was responsible for engineering. I was our product manager, but he's also a brilliant product guy. But as we started to add more people to the team, we added a sales team, we added, finance and people operations, recruiting. It just naturally fell to me that those people just ended up reporting into me and engineering was reporting into him. And so as we grew and the other parts of the company grew, it just became more of a natural transition. And it's exactly what Peter was referring to. It's about the company becomes the product, not just the product, the website or the app. And we realized, both of us, Pasha and I, that the role of the CEO was shifting from being less about just building the product, but building the team that builds the product. And so that naturally became more my purview. I was always recruiting for us. So it felt like a pretty natural transition. And we discussed it and we decided, all right, let's do it. But I never went into Polyvore ever expecting this to happen.
It's an interesting thing, which Jess makes the comment. She's like, well, I wasn't looking for this. And if I could be simple about it, there are kind of two types of people that come to the role of CEO. Those that want to be CEO and those that, if you will, earn the title. And I think founders inherently, when they're founder CEOs, earn the title because they took the initiative. But it's a red flag for us as venture capitalists when someone shows up at our office and says, I'm really ready to be a CEO, so I'm looking for CEO opportunities. I'm like, well, that's great. Because you're going to adverse select into the broken companies that are looking for a CEO. And there was something very natural about Jess's evolution to the role because it sort of was happening as a course of how she was scaling inside of the company. The ambition to be a CEO can be a dangerous thing, but I actually curious as you think about now that you're in the role, how's it different than maybe what your role was before, and what's been unexpected about it?
Well, I think the role of the CEO definitely changes as the company gets larger, right? And I went into this assuming like, okay, there's a set of things we need to do in the next, I don't know, at least a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years, that I think I can do. I think I know how to do these things, or I can learn some of them. But I also went into it thinking like, there may be a point at which I might not be the right CEO anymore. Like maybe taking the company public requires a different sort of person. So I definitely went in with it that way. So I agree, like you don't want to just be like, I have to be the CEO. It's about what does the company need and what are you actually good at? And this was sort of the right period for me. Things that have been unexpected. I thought I would be able to spend a lot more time working on the product in addition to doing a lot of the other duties. That's turned out to be not the case. I spend so much of my time recruiting and meeting and thinking about architecting the right team to get what we need done. So that's been a little bit surprising. As a control freak, it's been difficult sometimes to let go of some of the product responsibilities. I was the VP of product before that, but we have an awesome PM, Rachel, who it took us a while to figure out how to delegate, how to let things go. But I think we've gotten that down. So that's been surprising. The amount of external stuff that I have to do has also been a little surprising. I'm more of an introvert by nature, so having to do that is not the most natural thing, but it comes up a lot. So it's something you just sort of have to push and do. Yeah.
How about your priorities? And so part of this is a bit of a day in the life. How do you think about your week, your or any period of time? And as a CEO, how do you think about setting those priorities?
Well, we have a strategic set of priorities for the company, and there are parts of the things that are going very, very well that don't need attention. The important thing is I think you want to design the company to operate like as a series of like blocks that work well and spin on their own and have APIs to the other groups kind of. So, I look for the parts that are not, that need attention or need help and try to spend my time there helping. And that might mean adding a new person or changing a new process, or it might be the interface between two teams is not correct, so you have to rewrite the API. But a lot of the time now I'm spending on recruiting and just building parts of the team that aren't there yet. Like Polyvore has product and engineering, we've got a sales team, but we're actually missing a few functions. Like we don't have a marketing team, we don't have PR. And that is, we've always done our marketing and growth through our community, which is a very powerful tool, or powerful force. Like they go and tell their friends about the site, and that's how we've grown. But now thinking about that being a function, like how do we build that? We found a CFO. Like a lot of the time just goes there. But I try to figure out where I'm needed, and then always make sure to pay some attention to product, because that's probably the thing I'm strongest at.
Yeah, and I think it's that building the system. There's editing the team. People have used that as sometimes you make the right hires, sometimes you make the wrong hires, and it's a really different role. Let me come back to, if you were to introspect in the development of your career and some mistakes that you've made that would be instructive maybe for the group to learn from. Anything that stands out?
Oh, so many. One of the biggest mistakes I probably made early on was not talking to other entrepreneurs at all. I was, heads down, working really hard. Every problem that we had, we sort of dealt with internally, and I think that can be a big mistake, because the only external data points you have about other companies are like things you read about on TechCrunch, where everything seems to be doing great. It's all the positive stories, all the spin, all the overnight success stories. At that time, Quora wasn't around, so I didn't have that as a resource. I remember I looked at Mark Andreessen's blog. That was probably one of the best resources. But I was very insular, and so I didn't realize, I didn't have enough perspective to know, the company's actually doing fine. In fact, we're doing better than many of the other startups out there. Or this problem that I have that feels like the end of the world is actually something that many other companies have gone through and survived, or it's actually super common. Like everybody has that problem. Like I didn't even realize that every time someone left the company, I thought, oh my God, this is terrible. This must mean we're screwing something up. And now I realize that's a natural part of how companies evolve. So that was a big mistake. When I started to talk to other entrepreneurs, it was great for my mental health. as well as for getting data points, solutions, ideas on how to fix things. So that was a big mistake I think I made in the beginning. Other things, a common mistake I think most entrepreneurs make is being too slow to have someone leave. Like you just want to, you've invested in bringing someone on. They've left their awesome job at Google or Yahoo or somewhere else to join you, and it's not working for some reason. It might be role fit, it might be culture fit, but you just keep trying to make it work because you made a commitment to them, and they made a commitment to you. And sometimes it's just not a fit, and you just need to move on. And it's better for them in the long run, and it's better for you. And that was a hard lesson too.
Shifting gears again, and we'll get to audience questions. Part of the CEO's job is to paint the vision of the future of the company, and I'd love to hear, and I think the audience would benefit from hearing what's the future for Polyvore look like, and what do you visualize as success for the company?
Yeah. So Peter talked about the fashion magazine side of Polyvore. There's another sort of trend that we track nicely against, which I think is the evolution of e-commerce. So if you think about how e-commerce came about on the web, it was driven by categories like electronics, so buying a digital camera. And the way you think about buying a digital camera is, well, it's very research driven. You care about hard numbers and attributes like number of megapixels or price. And because of that, the e-commerce experience, the standard e-commerce experience is a search box and then a set of filters, like digital camera refined by 10 to 16 megapixels, under $500. And then you start to look at the reviews. And that's, whether you're looking at a clothing site or anything on Amazon.com, that's sort of the standard UI. But there's actually a whole category of goods that you just don't buy that way. Like I have this, I bought this shirt. It's like a specific color. It's actually got a huge hole in the back, which is kind of impractical, but I just like it. That's my taste. I like this shirt. And I like the particular brand that it came from. So I'm buying this shirt based on my personal taste, which is incredibly arbitrary and based on trends that evolve over time. Like I'm sure this shirt will be extremely uncool in 10 years or 2 years, I don't know. But
it'll be cool again in 10 years.
That's right, yeah. But taste is always evolving. So I think there's a category of products that you buy based on taste. And at Polyvore, we're trying to understand people's taste. So when people mix and match products they like, that's them giving us data saying, hey, this product is cool. These two products go together. We can extract from that a trend, the hole in the back of your shirt trend or whatever. And we can track that over time. So it's actually, our community is giving us tons and tons of data about taste. And from there, we can do all kinds of things, like build a better shopping experience that's more discovery and browse-based, have friends recommend to friends what they're buying. And so that's sort of what I see as the evolution of Polyvore. And it doesn't just apply to fashion. It's also, the way you buy a sofa or wall decor, wedding items. But I think there's actually a lot of categories of products that fall into this. So that's sort of where I see the product vision going.
I've been really moved by the community you've built and some of the stories that come out of that. I'd love to hear your description of the community, and we call them users, but they're not really users. They're the creators on the site, and some of the personal stories that come out of that.
Yeah. So I think what people don't necessarily realize is when you look at Polyvore and why people are making all these collages, these sets, some people think, they're shopping for themselves. They're creating a personalized wish list of things that they want. That's not what they're doing. It's actually a form of self-expression. I think, especially for women, what you're wearing is sort of an extension of who you are. It's a form of self-expression. So a lot of these people are on the site for creative reasons, for self-expression reasons, and they're making friends and building a community. So we've heard all kinds of interesting stories from people in the community who've become friends. We recently had a meetup in New York. We flew about 11 members from Brazil, France, all over the US, Canada. Someone she was from a small town in Canada, and she'd never ridden in a taxi before. We brought her to New York for Fashions Night Out, which is a big sort of party on the streets of New York right before Fashion Week. Limo ride, take her to the hotel, a great breakfast with everybody, and then just seeing the stories that came out of that was really incredible. Like people saying, I use Polyvore as a form of self-expression. When my father passed away, it was a way for me to sort of get therapy and support from the other members, or people making friends. And one girl said, I met someone on the site who I'm inviting to my wedding, and that's the first time we're ever going to meet. So it's really amazing when you give people tools to express themselves and the ability to connect. They really form these super strong relationships. And it doesn't have to be through Facebook. They don't have to actually know each other that well, but you just sort of, in this self-expression environment, build real bonds. And that's sort of what's happened with our community. We pay a lot of attention to community management. We have a great community manager, Nadia, who actually talks to the members and meets them. And when there are issues, sometimes she'll call them. We've sent flowers to people. We've had someone she was very ill, and we found her blog, and we found a sweater that she wanted. So we bought her the sweater, and we made a cup, and we printed her Polyvore set on it, and we sent it to her. And she was really touched. Her whole family sent us like a handwritten card, like little things like that. Those little touches, the little human touches, make a lot of difference. Yeah.
We at a board meeting, the last board meeting we had, Jess showed us a video of the community members. They flew to New York, and I think all of us were brought to tears. You underestimate the impact of empowerment on people. When they're given a voice where they didn't have a voice and a way to self-express, it shapes who they are. It's in the Maslow hierarchy of needs. You're at the very tip of the pyramid. And they all had just such love for Polyvore, and they were saying thank you. And like if you're an investor, you say, well, these are the people creating the content. Not only do we not pay them, they're madly in love with the company, and yet they're building the company. So it's part of, I think, the future of a lot of products in tapping into that creative power, harnessing it, but making it, and we see the same thing at Yelp. Wikipedia never ceases to amaze me. The Wikipedians that spend, I talked to Jimmy Wales at the beginning, in 2002, 2003, to try and invest in Wikipedia, and he laughed at me. He's like, last time we tried to invest in Wikipedia, we killed it, because they financed it as a company, and then they quit because it didn't work, and then the community took over, and then it became Wikipedia. And there are people that were spending hundreds of hours a month curating for no other value than the sense of connectedness and greater good that it brought to you. So a great product experience is in touch with that, and I think it's one of the really powerful things that you've had going at Polyvore. The last question I want to ask before shifting gears and getting questions from the audience, I'm on your board, and this is a little awkward to ask this question, but how do you think about us, the board, the venture investors, and you can say what you want, and where, as the CEO, you sort of sit in between a lot of different concentric circles and integrating them. How do you think about us, and then maybe describe the relationship for the audience? I think it'd be pretty interesting, and I can dispute all the stuff you say.
So, part of being a first-time entrepreneur, I never actually knew what to expect from a board. And so we've always had a great relationship. Yeah. And it wasn't actually till very recently we had an experienced CFO join us. And she's been CFOing for 15 years, and she's been on lots of boards. And she came to our board meeting, and she's like, you have no idea how awesome your board is. They are so, thoughtful, strategic. They're on the same page. Like, they don't, they give advice just the right level. And I guess I didn't even realize that. I think our board has always been incredibly supportive. I think the important thing is knowing what your entrepreneur is good at and where to leave them to do their magic in the one area that they're good at, and then how to get them help, right? Yeah. And I think Peter's always been really good at identifying, like, okay, you guys, I'm not gonna tell you how to run the product or engineering. You seem to be doing a good job there. But have you thought about this as a revenue model, or have you talked to this person? So a lot of the introductions and new relationships, that kind of stuff has always been really helpful. Also, our board has been incredibly helpful with recruiting. Like Peter often takes the time to meet some of the VP candidates that we're doing. He's great at closing and selling. As you can see, he sold me pretty amazingly. So he's always been very helpful with that.
Yeah, she's too kind. I mean, boards, particularly at a company like this, when we invested, it had 3 people. For the first phase, I would say, you think about do no harm. And boards don't make companies. They can break companies for sure. And for that first 18, 24 months, we didn't really have board meetings in the classic sense. There wasn't really an operating plan. There wasn't any of the kind of classic stuff, because you have a little flicker of a flame. And if you try and put the structure that we have at, say, like the Twitter board, where there's a real infrastructure, the board materials go out a week in advance, it's a really disciplined, that wouldn't have been appropriate. And so a big part of a company, and I think what Jess is going through, which is I think would be fun for all of you to watch her scale as a CEO, a company at 30 people is radically different than a company at 150. And that 3 to 30 is a huge leap, but 30 to 150, which is the trajectory you're on, means you get to a point you don't know everyone in a company. You have to really obsess on building the system that builds the system, look for friction points, try and remove them. And that's very different than at the beginning, where at the beginning you're trying to do things quickly, have experiments, not be bureaucratic, and some degree of process has to come in when you get to 150 people that didn't exist at 30. And that's where a board, I hope, we become more effective at saying, okay, there's certain things you want to recruit in, expertise. If you're, if you're in the credit business, you probably want to, if you're doing payments, you probably want to recruit in someone who's an expert at fraud. If you're doing e-commerce, you probably want to recruit in someone who's an expert at global logistics. Things that, and I think in a startup, the finance function, you can innovate around it, but Cheryl, the person they recruited, had been the CFO at AdMob, and there's an equation in recruiting Cheryl that I remember, which is, at first blush, she's like, well, I was at AdMob, who are you? You're this company I've never heard of, and you have to have the confidence and belief in yourself, and Jess had this, and to say, when Cheryl spends enough time here, she can't not come. She'll be so seduced by what we've created, and Cheryl's like, I don't think so, and we didn't quit. And there's a great story where we said, well, let's do an interim role, and because we all had this confidence in the company that if she spends 3 months in the company, she won't be able to leave. And I think it was about 2 months and maybe 20 days. She called up and said, "Okay, I'm gonna join." But it wasn't easy to get me. But well, let me shift gears to well, actually, one last question for you. Advice in if you were to rewind the clock, put yourself into this audience. Anything that we haven't talked about that you wish you'd known and that you can impart as wisdom to the people in front of you?
Yeah. Well, I would repeat some of the things I had said already, like take the more challenging path, optimize for learning as much as possible. Mm-hmm. The other thing, which has become a company mantra at Polyvore, is do a few things well. If you're going to start your own thing, maybe you have a grand vision of like all the different features it's going to have and all the different, revenue lines you're going to do, and, keep that vision, but do one piece of that first and do it really, really, really well. It's so much better to do a few things well than many things poorly. For Polyvore, the very first thing that we did was the Polyvore editor, which is a tool where you mix and match and you can create the collages. And there were actually other companies at the time, and there still are. There's probably 40 different companies out there that have a Polyvore editor. But we just focused on building that and making that experience really fun and really addictive and really fast and smooth. And that was what brought users in, and then we added more features. But if you have a crappy editor feature and a crappy, profile and all these other features that are just not that good or a little bit too slow or clunky, like you will bleed users. So just really, really focus on identify the one thing that matters and just make it as great as possible, like polish all the details.
I'd amplify that point. It's lost in a lot of education on entrepreneurship, the benefit of hyper-focus, because it comes across as being excessively narrow. And there's this tension of, well, if you're that focused, you're supposed to go after big opportunities. And if you perfect the editor, is that going to be the transformational social commerce company? And the story behind every one of the success stories that I can relate to, be it Facebook, hyper-focused on the college market, Polyvore focused on the niche that you guys started in, Yelp focused on 27-year-olds in San Francisco writing restaurant reviews. Their competitors were doing the 27 million local businesses all had a homepage day one. Let's light up the whole network. And Yelp said, no, let's just do this really well. And building on success is a lot easier than trying to boil the ocean, whatever term you want to use. In compounding on success and having that internal culture where you're disciplined about it defines, I think, so many of the success stories from the losers in the category. Well, let me shift to the audience and
I thought of two more things.
Oh, please.
One, don't go it alone. I'm really, really lucky to have an awesome set of founders that I work with. I don't know what I would do without them. It's hard. It's really hard. You go through all these crazy ups and downs, and everything feels like it's agony and then ecstasy. And you want someone, you need a partner to go through that with, because otherwise you'll go insane. The other thing is just if you don't have an idea. I've seen a lot of this. I've seen a lot of this lately, where I just want to be at a startup. I just want to co-found a company. I'm just going to do something. I'm going to quit my job and just do something. But if you don't have an idea that you're passionate about, it's actually really hard to get through those ups and downs. Yeah. You will just discard the idea immediately if you don't feel really strongly about it. So if you don't have that idea yet, keep thinking about it. But in the meantime, go do something productive. Go to another startup and learn. At least start learning how they run it. Learn how to manage a P&L or how to be a product manager. Just go do something rather than try to sit in a room with a whiteboard with your co-founder and a computer, being all right, what's our ideas? I think that's really hard. Right.
The falling in love with the purpose of a company, I see people go from human to superhuman when that happens. And I think when you fell in love before you came, so it was very much you were, in that sense, a founder of the core mission. But when you recruit people and you're in touch with, there's a lot of talk of the why, the how, and the what of a company. And like really great companies spend a lot of time on why do you exist, and those questions of why are we doing this? You'd be surprised how many people answer it with a blank stare. Well, I wanted to do a startup. I want to be an entrepreneur. Versus the answers you get from Jeff Bezos, or from you, or from I love Twitter's why. Twitter brings you closer, and they have a very expansive idea. Well, we don't finish that sentence. We let our users finish that, and it's this compounding sense of that's the emotion of the company. And it's sometimes easy to make it more mechanical and say, okay, well, this is what one does when they start a company, and lose the magic. And when it's there, it's amazing. You start to close candidates you didn't think you could close. You continue to work long hours and feel a sense of direction. So. Well, let me open it up for questions, and yeah.
Hey, Peter, Greg Tar, nice to see you again. Jess, nice to meet you. My question is, I'm on the board of Glimpse and AdMobius, and a lot of tensions arise both among the founders and also even among board members from time to time on different directions. So I wanted to ask you, Jess, in your role, how you've been able to moderate disputes or heated differences among founders, maybe with an example, and Peter, on your side, with other board members in this company or past companies, how you've been able to resolve some of those issues.
So to repeat the question for Jess and for me, how do we deal with resolving conflict and tensions that exist between founders and other directors and maybe founders too?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had sets of strategic disagreements at the company. When it's between the founders, like it's harder because you both have to be there, right? If it's from a new executive you're going to hire, you can actually screen for a lot of those things. Like if they say, hey, I think the direction of the company should be this, and you're like, wait, we don't want to become, we don't want to carry inventory and ship stuff to our Polyvore members. You can screen for that ahead of time, but when it's with the founders, that's a little bit more difficult. At the end of the day, I think you have to be on the same page to the rest of the company, right? So you have to have a unified front. One thing we've tried is, and this doesn't really happen that often, but like, what's an example? Maybe how, when we were earlier days, like how we were going to make money, we sort of set a time window on these things. Like, all right, we don't necessarily agree about whether we should sell virtual goods to our users or sell advertising on the site, but we're going to pick one, and that might be influenced by who's actually going to spend the time to work on it, and then give ourselves a window to prove that out as in that, within that window of time, and that, at least there's an agreement around that. And then after that point, you can go back and like, all right, we totally failed at this. Like, what do you want to do now? Let's go back, or let's continue. You can sort of reevaluate it, but to give yourself that framework, I think is one way to solve it.
Yeah, this is one of the areas where I think you can hyper-learn conflict resolution. There's all sorts of ways to study how one does it, and in my experience, there's all varieties of conflict, but they end up shaping your daily existence because those are the things that stress you out. And the first step always in conflict resolution, in my experience, is you got to get people focused on the right goal or agenda. And you can find situations where people let their self-interest get in front of the company interest. That's easy to spot, and that happens with directors, where directors say, look, I'd like to sell the company or not sell the company, and you have to say, okay, you have to think about the shareholder here as a third party. This is a bit of the Rawlsian moment of disinterest, and saying, okay, pretend like you could be anybody. What's the right thing for the company? And getting someone to focus beyond themselves to that higher good can really be an antiseptic for most of the problems that emerge. The bigger issues in conflict, I think, come up between executives that are peers, and this is a routine problem where engineering wants X, product wants Y, sales wants Z, and a lot of what we do in working with the CEO is to help them be the hinge between those executives. And there's this moment that occurs in a great executive team where they feel shared interlocking objectives. And when you see that, it's like a soccer team moving in perfect flight. You say, something special happened here. So it's rare. And when you don't see it, you say, okay, well, you guys got to get on the same page. And it's very clear from this board meeting, you've got conflict that's, being talked about, but a lot of it not talked about, where there's passive aggressiveness. And so by trying to get the foreground more clear and saying, these are the things we're committed to beyond ourselves, here's how I have to be successful by making that other person successful, and here's what they have to do to make me successful. They're interlocking dependencies. You start to move above the two individuals going at each other's throat. But it sort of defines our existence, and so there's not a single answer I can give other than you can study it and study it aggressively, and I think it serves you well.
The other thing is, I think you need to start with the assumption that it is better to move in a direction versus not to move at all, right? So if you have one vector, one person wants to go this way, other vectors this way, and you're not moving, like that is the worst state to be in, like a state of inaction. At least it's better to go in that direction somehow. Like, so I think we have that understanding. So when we get into a gridlock, it's like, okay, we have to solve this because the worst possible thing is to continue to be arguing about it forever.
This thing, Jess, right, one of the traits of successful first-time CEOs, and actually one of the death knells, is decision making. And a lot of times people come to the role of CEO because they're smart. Everyone in this room is smart, does well, likes to think about complex problems. Making a decision is something different. And intelligence can at times be an enemy for decision making because there's always what if. And CEOs that freeze in decision making very quickly create politics on their team. Because if they can't decide, the team says, well, I have to use different means of influence because I'm not getting any direction from the CEO. And at times, you say, look, I'm the CEO, I don't know if I want to pick. But it turns out, just as Jess says, if you don't make a decision and give them direction, then those problems will bloom into something much worse. And so there's comments from field generals and generals at war saying better to make 100 decisions and have 51 be right and 49 wrong than to make one decision a day. And I think that absolutely is true for a CEO because you just never have enough information.
You need to move really fast.
Yeah. Please.
So my question was that you talked about like while starting up, you should think about like having an idea that you're really passionate about, but at the same time not start a company alone, like have co-founders. So how is the process of finding a co-founder who is as passionate about the idea as you are, and like what are the other qualities apart from passion for the idea and the product that you should look for in a co-founder?
So because I was at Google, I got exposure to a ton of people who I would consider like, hey, we really get along, we work together, we think the same way about product design, right? So I was able to meet a lot of people who I could consider starting a company with. So that's one reason to go to a larger environment first. Then I think the other thing that I've heard about, I don't know how successful it is this thing called founder dating, where you just sort of go to this mixer with all these people who want to start companies and sort of get to know people. I have no idea if it works, but that's what I've heard. In terms of what to look for, in addition to having passion about the same thing, I think you have to make sure you're motivated the same way and you have the same philosophy around the core, whatever is going to be the core of the company. Like an example of like philosophy mismatch is if you think, all right, I want this to be a product and engineering driven company, and the other person's like, no, I want this to be a sales, business development driven company. Like that is a core mismatch that may like break you guys apart at some point. So you have to screen for those kinds of things, like philosophical stuff. Or if one person, especially if it's two engineering people, one is like, all right, we just need to do whatever we need to do to get it done. Facebook, move fast and break things, like the willingness to break things, like we just got to move quickly and let's hack a little bit. Or if you put that with Apple people who are more like, no, it has to be perfect. Don't release it until it's perfect. Like that is a definite philosophy mismatch, and that's going to cause major problems for the two founders. So you have to screen for the things that are like your core values.
One thing I found seeing the best companies always have more than one person, where it's not sometimes the external world thinks it's all person X, but I've studied a lot lately first-time CEOs that fail, that go on and do it a second time and succeed. And there are many examples. We can point to, obviously, Steve Jobs, but there's a long list of them. Studying what does the A/B test tell you? What do they do differently the second time? And a common theme, and it is the theme, is acute self-awareness. The second time around, they say, I'm not this, this, and this, so I better find that in my partner. And if you're not a great master of execution, you can't assume that you're going to micromanage your way through scaling a business. And so I have an example now, a company I'm an investor in, New Relic, where Lou, the second time around, Lou said, my co-founder needs to be a guy that can run engineering, because I love to ideate, I love to create these things, but if I have to run engineering day to day, and then he came to me and said, look, I need a guy who can run and scale sales. So that acute self-awareness, where these three vectors of leadership, we talk about vision, relationship skills, and execution skills. I haven't seen somebody that pegs the top of all three of those. You're probably long one, short one, and medium on the other. So the self-awareness and identifying, okay, what am I really good at, what am I not good at, and mapping your co-founder onto that means you don't end up in a situation where you have two founders that want to be the visionaries. That doesn't work. One of them won't be at the company if the company's successful. over a period of time. And so that acute self-awareness is this is the A/B test. What do you learn from someone who gets it right the second time versus the first time? And that's part of the learning process. Time for one more question, I think.
How do you blueprint good decisions?
How do you blueprint good decisions, Jess?
Well, the way we try to drive the strategy at Polyvore is we have clear overarching goals of what we need to do. Like this is where the company is trying to go, and this is in particular the metric we're trying to move. So if you take the subjectiveness out of the question, right? So you're like, all right, the metric we're trying to move is number of transactions that Polyvore drives a day. Let's say we pick that. Then you give that to the team and say, this is the number you're trying to move. And you can actually clearly see whether they're doing well or not. And after that, we usually set aside like a list of projects that we think will move the needle on that metric. And we may be wrong. Like we might set that at the beginning of the quarter. In the end, we've done something completely different. But as long as the team has still moved that metric, that's success. So I think you have to structure the teams in such a way where everyone has a clear set of goals they're trying to hit that are actually measurable. And that takes a lot of the day-to-day decision making becomes much more clearer. Because if you're working on something, you're like, should we do this? I don't know if it's going to work. You can just try to test for that. You can evaluate it based on that metric. Does that answer your question?
In the venture business, we make decisions in all sorts of ways. I would tell you, in new investment decisions, there needs to be something in that decision that feels really uneasy. And it sounds counterintuitive, but I look back to our investment in Uber. Boy, the total addressable market for black cars at a price point that Uber had, we thought, boy, it could be a tiny market. At the time, there were maybe 600 black cars in San Francisco that were licensed that Uber could tap into. And you had to take this huge leap of faith that you could expand the market. And at the moment, I don't know what numbers they've published, but there are already more black cars on the street at this point in time than there were total licensed black cars in San Francisco at the time we invested. And any great investment has that moment of just counterintuitive angst. And the fact that you still want to do it despite that tells me the blueprint of that decision was right, because if we just did the obvious things in the venture business, we'd be making iPads and get killed by Apple. Polyvore, boy, it was not obvious. It may still be. Time will tell. I think that's it. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of DFJ, Basis, and STVP, we'd like to present you with this memorabilia. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us.